In today's video, I'm going to show you just how easy it is to bake some yeasted, gluten-free, and vegan bread rolls that taste good. This recipe has two baking options. You can bake the rolls as pull-apart or free-form rolls. We're going to be taking my bread machine loaf dough recipe, and we're simply going to be rolling them into smaller portions and bake them in a dish in the oven. To begin, we need to prepare the yeast, and then we're going to be sifting all the dry ingredients and then combining both. And then this dough does need to rise, so we're going to have to give it a few hours before we proceed with rolling out the dough. Let's get going. So here I have a bigger cup that I'm going to be combining 1 cup of warm water with 2 teaspoons of active dry yeast and 2 tablespoons of psyllium husk, which I have left whole. If you're using the powder, you would just need to use a little bit less. We're actually going to let this sit for about 5 minutes in order for everything to gel and for the yeast to activate. The water's warm, it is not hot, but it's definitely not cold water. So having water that's slightly warmer will make things much faster. I will make sure to include the right substitutes in the notes of this recipe. They will be included below in the video description and as well in the actual recipe posts. The combination of flours I use in this recipe is actually really nice. I include some light flour, some starches, and some seed flour. If you did not want to use seed flour, another option could be tiger nut flour, or you could use nut flours if you're not allergic. The first flour in this recipe is buckwheat flour, and I have 1 cup, but I'm also including the weight of all these flours for you. So as I create more and more recipes, I will do my best to include the weight of each, not just the measurement. And we have 1/2 cup of white rice flour, 1/2 cup of brown rice flour, 1/2 cup of potato starch, and 1/2 cup of tapioca starch. Using 1 cup of starch in a recipe like this will make everything much lighter. Oh, and let's not forget, I believe it was 1/2 cup of seed flour and the tiger nut flour. The seed flour is much browner in color, but does really add some nice, amazing flavors to this loaf, or any loaf for that matter. So it's important to sift all the dry ingredients because some starches and even some flours will have more little clumps, and it's better to get rid of those as opposed to mixing them into your dough ingredients. If you prefer to weigh your ingredients, you can sift them before or after you weigh them. So once that is sifted, we are going to check on the yeast mixture. I don't know if you can see this, but the texture is quite thick. So the psyllium, if people are wondering what it does in a bread recipe, this is what helps to thicken and stick your dough ingredients together. In just a few minutes, this has expanded and created sort of like a gel. This is what we're going to be putting in our bread recipe. It's important to mix your dry ingredients too, just to make sure that everything is kind of well distributed throughout. You don't want little clumps in here either. Once that is mixed, did I say mixed? That's the French in me coming out. Once that is mixed, I forgot to add the coconut sugar, but we are gonna do that right now. And another ingredient that I left out that we're gonna add right away is the salt. You don't want to leave out the salt in a bread recipe because your bread is going to taste really bland. In this recipe, we're including 1/2 tablespoon of a good quality sea salt. I'm going to give that a mix. So then we're left with the plant milk, which in today's recipe, I'm adding homemade hemp milk, which is made with hemp hearts and water. That's it. So we're going to go ahead and add the psyllium gel, which was mixed with water and yeast. And we're also gonna just right away add 1 cup of milk. The recipe for my loaf calls for 1 1/4, but I don't want my rolls to be too wet. So I'm gonna try just 1 cup with hopes that it is just enough. And then we're gonna mix everything well because I want that gel to be mixed in with the dry ingredients. Once everything is mixed super well is when we're just gonna cover the bowl and let this dough rise for a couple of hours. The recipe says from 2 to 5 hours, but for today, I think 2 hours might be enough. As of right now, I feel like the dough is a little bit dry, but I'm gonna keep mixing. I almost feel like using my hands, but I'm not gonna do that. It's very sticky. But you know what? Maybe it's perfect because, well, when I say sticky, is very sticky, stretchy. But it might be perfect for making rolls because I wanted to keep its shape, if that makes sense. I don't want to plop down the dough and then go super flat on me. But there's a lot of dry flour at the bottom and I'm just gonna keep mixing it. When you need to add water to a recipe, it's always better to go in super small increments. So I'm gonna do 2 tablespoons with hopes that that is also enough. Don't be afraid to experiment, especially when you're baking gluten-free and vegan. You will only learn if you try, and the more you try and the more you experiment, you'll get to know which flours you like to bake with and which flours are safe for you and your family to consume. And once you do that, then you'll kind of get a good base of flours that you can use on a regular basis for bread, for cookies, for muffins. That looks much better. It was just way too dry in the bottom before. I'm kind of out of breath because I'm mixing this quite hard with my hands. But I mean, I never use a mixer to do my breads, but definitely if you wanted to try it, you can. But I don't know if you can tell, but it's a very nice and stretchy dough. So this might just be just right for what I'm trying to do today. So once you feel that all the ingredients are mixed in well, that there's no dry bits of flour at the bottom, which in my case, I don't. I'm actually gonna show you the dough because typically a dough would be almost too wet. It's sticky, but it's definitely very stretchy. And for today, like I said, this might be perfect for this recipe. So once your dough is ready, cover it and let it rise for a good couple hours at least. And then we'll check on it and see if it's ready to roll thin. All right, so it's been 2 hours since I've left this dough to rise. So I'll have to check it out and it's looking really good, which I'm happy. What I'm gonna do is then now transfer the dough to my counter. I will dust a little bit of flour. In this case, it is buckwheat. And then we're just gonna like try to equally divide the dough so they make the perfect little rolls. This, believe it or not, is my tea strainer. And it works really well for this. The thing is, I'm happy with the texture of this dough, which will make it easier to manipulate with our hands. I don't want to put too much flour because I don't want to dry out the dough either, but I don't want it to stick. So let me just flour my hands a little bit. And then we're just going to, so that's really nice dough. I'm just gonna like kind of roll it out so then we can just divide it in equal amounts. Perhaps I should try to make nine rolls, which will fit kind of nicely in my square dish. So we're gonna just try to eyeball. I'm not gonna measure. I'm just gonna approximately. And I can tell this last one is a little bit too small. Yeah, so you can kind of like eyeball it and adjust if necessary. And if you want to be more precise, go ahead and use your scale to make sure they're all even. I'm gonna grab some of the flour that's already on my board and I'm just gonna try to create nice little balls. So That sounded funny. I've already greased my pan with a little bit of olive oil. You can use that, you could use coconut oil, but I'm just gonna gently place each little dough ball. I want like perfect little round balls, so hopefully they will keep their shape. And I want to try to keep them smooth too. And I'm not sure if a dusting of flour is better or worse, but this is where experimenting comes into play. You need to try stuff sometimes to see what works and what doesn't work. Sometimes adding too much of flour will dry it out. Sometimes it'll be just right. I really like the texture of this dough. It's beautiful. For a dough, a gluten-free dough that does not have gums in the ingredients, it's really nice. When you're making bread, I find any recipe that adds like a plant milk will create really nice texture, and it improves the flavor too. And often with gluten-free baking, if you only have a few ingredients, and depending on how dry everything is, often recipes will crack too. So I really hope this recipe bakes up really nicely. I'm gonna try to even these out a little bit. I can feel the difference. I mean, if you wanted to be super precise, you could weigh these. They are gonna expand in my dish a little bit, but that's all right. And who knows, maybe these will make perfect hamburger buns too. I just really miss like a really good sandwich bun or hamburger bun. I do different things at times, but it would just be nice to have another go-to recipe.
And of course I had to try it, so if you too want to try some free-form burger buns, go ahead and space them out on a baking sheet on a piece of parchment paper and you will love how they turn out.
I typically bake my bread recipes at 450. For today, I felt that maybe that would be too hot and I don't want them to get too hard on the outside. So I've reduced my heat to 400 and I'm hoping that will be good for this recipe. I was just gonna say, we could potentially let these rise for another 30 minutes, but I guess I will have to test it both ways to see what works best. But this is a mixture of homemade hemp milk and some olive oil. I'm gonna give this a quick brushing with hopes that it will kind of like help to soften the outside. Some people with regular wheat-based baking, they do the brushing after. So after with butter or milk, after the buns are out, or the rolls. But I want to try it before, and maybe my next bake I'll do it after to compare. But
I did end up trying just a brushing of oil, a mist of water and oil, and a brushing of just milk. And my favorite is probably just the oil, but none are necessary. You can just bake it without as well.
The bottom of my oven has a preheated baking stone. I'm gonna put this dish directly on that baking stone. It's just to help them poof up. And we're gonna start with 20 minutes and then we'll check on them at 20 minutes, and if it needs more time, then we will keep it for a little bit longer. But no matter what, I will include the proper and the final baking times in my recipe post. Maybe 10. The middle one seems smushy, so I'll give them, so that's been 20 minutes, so I'll go another 8 to 10 minutes. They look really good. I'm gonna keep them in a pan for 5 minutes because right now they're really hot, and then I'm going to transfer them to a wire rack. Well, I'm super happy with this bake. After it's cooled for 5 minutes in the actual dish, I transferred them to a cooling rack just to help the air circulate around them a little bit, because if you leave them in the dish, they might kind of get like soggy at the bottom, and you don't really want that. So by removing them from the dish, it'll just help to cool them off properly. Go ahead and slice one and enjoy it with your favorite buttery topping. But these buns are squishy, they're soft, they have good texture, good flavor. I'm really, really happy with this bake, and I hope you try it. And you could even put like sesame seeds on top of these, or your favorite herbs if you want. That would be amazing. But it's incredible. They don't crumble, they're soft, they're yummy.